All right. Welcome to Rich Conversations. This is another special episode. I'm really excited about this. I have a marine biologist with us, Shelby Thomas, joining us from Tampa, Florida. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So, why don't you introduce yourself real quick for our viewers and listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name's Shelby. I'm the founder and CEO of the Ocean Rescue Alliance. I'm a scientist. I'm finishing my PhD in marine biology and fisheries and aquatic sciences. I specialize in doing applied restoration work. I've worked with doing oyster, mangrove, seagrass, and as well as coral restoration. And through my organization, we expand on different applied restoration techniques throughout Florida, but also internationally, which we'll get into here in a bit. And looking forward to sharing more with you.
Awesome. So, what is marine biology, and then what sparked your interest in it?
Yeah, so marine biology as a whole, it's always interesting because sometimes people think at the surface level they're like, oh, you either study sharks, dolphins, or sea turtles, and it's actually quite more expansive than that. It's really the study of marine animals and resources. I do a lot of applied management and restoration work, so I'm looking at different management tools as well as applied restoration to scale up more effective restoration for our marine ecosystems that are at risk of collapsing. And in terms of what got my interest, I grew up in Florida all my life and have always had a love and passion for the ocean, and really was inspired from genuine curiosity. The ocean is, we've explored more into outer space than our own oceans. And I think the ocean's so intriguing in terms of so many resources that are also underutilized that have a lot of potential. And just in my short lifetime, I've seen our resources greatly diminish. The Florida coral reef tract, I've seen huge coral colonies that are hundreds of years old die in just 3 days. And so that really sparked my passion to kind of be a voice for the voiceless and figure out how can we restore these resources more effectively, as well as bringing awareness and creating more action within the community.
Wow, awesome. How does a coral reef die in 3 days that's been around for hundreds of years?
Yeah, so there's a lot of stress undergoing our different marine systems. Specifically here in Florida, we've had various outbreaks of different diseases like stony tissue loss disease, black band disease, which really affects those hard reef building corals. And so something like that, when you have that disease onset, you can actually see tissue degradation and die off very rapidly. So in that case, that's exactly what I saw, but other reefs are also under different stress from temperature change as well as ocean acidification, where it's becoming more acidic, the water is. So it's a combination of different environmental factors as well as pollution.
Wow. What do you enjoy studying about marine life most?
I would say just the immense expansion of things that you can do with it. I think people are becoming a little bit more aware of how a lot of marine resources can be used in your daily life. In fact, the ocean is why we're able to live on Earth and provides more oxygen than our terrestrial plants. And so, what really inspires me to continue to the work is there's so much that we can do with it. And we're really starting to merge into a space that we're calling the blue economy now, where we're looking at different innovative jobs that can come from the ocean that are also sustainable. So I'm really looking forward to, seeing that grow and expand in different applications of utilizing marine resources.
Awesome. I'm so excited to get into this. I go to the Field Museum a lot here in Chicago, and I see how connected like the natural world is to each other and then also us. Can you elaborate more on the connection between the oceans and life on land?
Yeah, absolutely. So just as I mentioned, the ocean is why we're able to live on Earth. And if you think about just water in general, it's critical to life, period. Our bodies are 75% water, and so is the ocean. And it's really responsible even for all of our weather patterns. And it's oftentimes not as fundamental in people's daily lives as how much interconnectedness and how much we rely on the oceans. Even if you live in the middle of the US and aren't by a direct water body, all water and streams lead back to the ocean as well. So it's critical to have a healthy ocean for us to also have healthy, happy lives on land.
What's the state of our oceans right now?
So, unfortunately, we have a lot of pressing issues on our marine ecosystems from pollution. I'm sure you've probably been aware of microplastics is also a trending issue that's within marine environments, but there's also other types of pollution from high nutrient fluxes that can change a lot of different nutrient loads in marine ecosystems, like from fertilizers or different really outflows from land. So we're needing to look at different responses to that to be more responsible from a company perspective. But there's also rising temperatures, and it really depends on what ecosystem you're talking about in terms of what stressors it's undergoing. But even things within oceanography, we're seeing patterns change from even currents and things like that that typically don't happen on the time frame that they are.
So it's almost like around the world, different ecosystems have different stressors at this point, right?
Yes. And I'd say they'd all really collectively rely around temperature change, pollution, different disease that can be onset depending on what environmental factors really can cause them. For example, in Florida, some of the disease outbreaks have even been potentially tied to dredging events. For example, we do a lot of beach renourishment in Florida, but also all the way up the states to New York and New Jersey and internationally, where they dredge sand offshore to maintain the beaches. And that's really a Band-Aid. And oftentimes they're suspending sediments that have been settled for hundreds and thousands of years, and they're disturbing bacteria that can have other really different effects on the ecosystem that were unintended.
What is dredging?
Sorry, you cut up a little bit.
What exactly is dredging?
Yeah, so dredging is where they'll essentially take sediment and they'll dig it up with a machine and move it for different purposes. Some people will dredge canals, so shipping canals, so you can actually fit larger ships, and they'll destroy that marine habitat. But oftentimes, especially for coastal restoration, it's very heavy in Florida, where they'll dredge sand offshore just to dump it onshore to maintain the beach. And that's actually, which I can talk a little bit later with my company, we build artificial structure to reduce wave energy that, like what natural reef systems do, can really help protect the coastline in addition to creating fish habitat. So we're hoping to combat doing beach renourishment and hopefully mitigating the need to do it at all eventually, but that's predominantly done all over the world, and it's really not the most effective, sustainable solution.
Wow. Can you elaborate on microplastics in the ocean?
Yeah, so I think they're now saying there might be more microplastic than there are stars right in the sky, and it's getting up there. It's a real problem. It's
fantastically
even been
unfortunate. Yeah,
it's not something to be proud of. But I mean, yeah, the whole plastic waste and in terms of recycling issues been, just accumulating over time. I think as a whole population, we're getting a little bit more aware of it, creating more alternatives that are biodegradable now, but there's still this issue that we have in terms of how do we clean it up. Microplastics have been found even in corals. They've been found in fish and food that we eat. So we really need to be aware of what we're putting out there and how we can have tools to actually clean up some of the mess that we've created.
Yeah, I first heard about microplastics like 2 years ago. And so these are what, like plastic molecules that can end up in the air we breathe, the food we eat, the water we drink. You mentioned that we're getting better at understanding plastic waste, but there's still already all this plastic waste in our oceans, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So we're becoming better at creating alternative solutions, like things that'll biodegrade or even more effectively recycling. So typically there's different grades of plastic, just like everything with decomposing materials. things like styrofoam is really bad for the environment because it takes hundreds of years to really break down, compared, you have woods, plastics still take a long time to break down. And even when they do break down, they create these microplastics. So these are just really small micro bits of plastic that still take very long times to degrade. And there's other things that scientists have been working on, which are really interesting. Not my specialty, but even from bacteria that can actually help digest and break down plastic further. So there's a lot of innovation coming within the space on how to deal with the plastic problem that we do have. And I think as a whole, we need to have more eco-conscious consumers and be more demanding as a consumer as well for these larger companies that do use single-use plastics is one of the major problems, because it does have one use and then it goes, like your plastic forks and things like that. Making sure that you're holding some kind of accountability for people that distribute them to look into alternative solutions, because now we have things like plant extracts that are just as strong but can actually biodegrade in a very quick time period.
So there's two problems, and it seems like from what you mentioned, we're working on addressing specifically this one problem of single-use plastics. What about addressing the plastics that are already in the ocean?
So that's a really hard problem to fix in terms of cleanup, right? How do we clean up microplastics? One thing, there's the Pacific Garbage Patch, which if you haven't heard of it, it's I forget which state. It might be Texas, it might even be bigger than that, but it actually fills a whole section of the ocean of just trash that's accumulated and collected from all the currents. And right now there's a lot of companies, including 4Ocean, as well as a few other ones, that have been trying to clean up and address what's already out there in the ocean so it doesn't break down further. In terms of microplastics and cleansing the ocean of that, I don't think there's any wide solutions for that right now, but I'm sure there's a lot of push to figure that out as well.
These aren't questions I have on here, but I just have like questions in general to pick your brain.
That's fine.
You have mentioned that we've explored space more than we have the oceans. Why is that? And do you see us in the near future exploring the oceans more?
Yeah. So the answer for why, I think sometimes things right in front of our face, we think are like in our immediate reach, and we just want to, as a human population, we're curious about a lot, right? So because Earth is our home and we still have access to the ocean, I think the whole outer space and is there any other planets like ours and things like that has always been in humans, curiosity. So I think that's taken a lot of precedence. Of course, it's a lot of money, but our oceans are very underlooked at. And I do think that this space is becoming a lot more popular now in terms of there's a huge push to explore the ocean, even the deeper sea components. And even from a medical perspective, actually, when I was undergrad, I used to do biomedical research, and the ocean itself can hold cures for various illnesses, and in fact has been attributed to a lot of our medical advancements. For example, horseshoe crab blood was part of the very first sterilization technique for IVs, for any kind of intravenous solutions. It actually helps prove that they're sterile. In fact, it's a liter of blood, of horseshoe crab blood, is $14,000. So it's pretty insane. A lot of the biomedical research I looked at was using secondary metabolites, which are essentially defense chemicals from corals and sponges that they emit when they're under attack in the ocean. And those actually have a lot more potency than what we typically use for things like breast cancer. We typically use Taxol, which is a derivative of a yew tree. We use a lot in medicine, a lot of different rainforests and terrestrial plants, but the ocean has a variety of different organisms. Like the cone snail actually has 100 times the potency of Taxol. So the amount of resources that we could use in the ocean is immense. We really are just tapping into, from a medical perspective, different uses of chemicals that we can find in the ocean and different organisms. And that's one of the also sad things is, we're risking so much of our marine environments we don't even know what's there that could also help save our futures.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, I think, becoming more of an exploratory topic from a lot of different perspectives, not only medicine, but conservation, exploration. And I definitely foresee more of it happening in the future.
Interesting. Uh, so deep sea, how much do we know about the deep sea, and how many resources do you think are available within the deep sea that we haven't discovered yet?
I think there's plenty we haven't discovered. I don't know the percentage in terms of, I'm not a deep sea biologist, but I do know that we've always had, for example, deep sea thermal vents have been of interest from a medical perspective, where there's actually living organisms at the bottom of the seafloor that have no light, and they can actually live off of different chemicals as well. So I think there's so much that we can explore and really utilize, and that's just going to continue to advance. Of course, it may not be as quite as costly as space exploration, but getting to those depths, and also safety wise, it does take a lot of precaution and regulations. So there definitely needs to be more funding attributed to exploring the ocean further, especially at depth.
So are there like a few people in the world for like ocean exploration as there is in space, of like SpaceX and Bezos and Elon Musk, like all wanting to explore space? Is there anybody on the ocean side, like big names that are responsible for pushing these ideas forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So one person that has really sparked a lot of interest in terms of people and bringing awareness to the ocean environment, Jacques Cousteau, which I'm sure you might have
Oh
heard
yeah.
of him before. He was known as an ocean explorer, but even from a female name, Sylvia Earle is one of the most world-renowned female oceanographers and explorers, and she was one of the first women to go very deep into the ocean. I think she went almost 2,000 feet, which is an incredible depth. And she did that in a submarine, of course. So yeah, there's plenty of ocean scientists, but I feel like it's not as widely known as some of our space explorers. But we should definitely change that narrative.
Are there like so we have these scientists. Are there like big funders of ocean exploration?
I would say that there are, maybe not as forefront as space and some of our other scientific disciplines, but there definitely are. I can't really pinpoint a name like you'd say like Elon Musk with SpaceX, but we need some more funders to pop out
Yeah.
up out there and take on the ocean. And I think in terms of which we'll maybe get into this a little bit later with my company, clean energy has become a more prolific topic and need, of course, for us around the world. We have wind and solar, which has been taking off. We definitely use that here in Florida, but our oceans is really an underutilized resource. Again, it's immense for clean energy. And so we're now seeing the clean energy world go a little bit more towards looking at ocean energy and really utilizing that wave energy and passive currents that are consistent all the time, unlike solar, which can be patchy and not used everywhere. So I hope that from an energy perspective, we're going to get some more funders that will look into the ocean from an energy side as well.
Interesting. So where else in the world has marine biology taken you?
It's taken me a lot of places. I with my company, we've been expanding to do some international artificial reefs that have different purposes for each project, but some of those being throughout the Caribbean. We've also looked to explore projects in Australia, as well as some smaller islands like the Maldives and things like that. We have a project that I'm really excited about. We're doing in Mexico that's a Mayan-themed artificial reef. And so we merge art with science as a way to really connect the public back to the ocean. Because one of the problems is the ocean's out of sight, out of mind. And until you get people to care about it, it's really hard. You have to make it personal for people to care about it. And so we try to use art as a way to do that, as a pathway. So we'll conduct different restoration sites that will implement art to create ecotourism. And that also can help incentivize making a destination that helps the local economy, helps create jobs. And I'm really excited about the Mexico reef because it's our first culturally relevant reef. We're working with a Mayan native to make a serpent deity called the Clownfish. And so that reef will be shaped as a snake and have all those Mayan features. And it'll be the first time we're doing a reef in Mexico. So it'll bring awareness to Mayan culture, but more importantly, create fish habitat. We're going to be outplanting coral with the community there. And it'll serve as a site that will be the community's resource for generations to come, not only educationally, but helping create jobs and further restore coral reefs for years.
So how big is this serpent?
So right now we're looking at doing a 200-meter reef. So it'll be done in phases. We'd probably do about 50 modules at a time, which are typically about 6 by 6 feet. And we'll link them all together to form a snake. But they'll all have these features like a natural reef would to create fish habitat, but still have some artistic components as well.
Wow. I want to ask about that a little bit later. I'm curious right now about, you mentioned these places, Australia, the Maldives, Mexico, Florida. How are they like similar, and how do they differ from each other as far as like ecosystems and stuff?
Yeah, great question. So one thing with my company, we're really trying to take an applied adaptive approach where we're meeting area specific needs. So we'll go in and do site assessments. Of course, every area is different and has different stressors and pressures that ecosystem needs. So for example, even within Florida, between the East and West Coast, we have different focuses where, especially in South Florida, we've been focusing more on coral restoration. And in some areas, we'll need a little bit more wave reduction where we're protecting the coastline. Where on the East Coast, we might shift and do oyster or mangrove restoration to address nutrient and water quality issues. So we'll change our really solution depending on the area's needs. And then even really looking into that site perspective of what kind of biological focus we're doing and what kind of restoration techniques we'll do. For example, with corals, we have a few different scalable solutions where we can use our coral lock, which is a threaded frag plug. Actually, I have an example right here, so it might be easier to show you than talk about it. So the coral lock is a threaded frag plug, and typically for coral restoration, people will individually glue corals down to reef structure. We're able to simply screw them in, so now we're able to outplant hundreds of corals at a time versus traditional methods. And we'll put them on different bases for natural reefs where we can make things like this and screw them together, and they'll fuse to create a larger, more reproductive coral. We actually outplanted 10,000 corals this way this past summer throughout the Keys up to Fort Lauderdale. But that's one example of, we'll take different techniques depending on what's needed in the area, what kind of corals we're needing to put out. But we also work with different organizations to increase biodiversity. So we sexually reproduce corals as well, working with the Florida Aquarium and Sea Corps. That helps really increase the genetic diversity instead of taking different fragments from one colony. So especially in the Caribbean and different areas, we'll look at what the immediate need is and what best way to address it from a restoration perspective.
So what you just showed us, so you create this structure and then you're able to like screw, like, you screw it in and then it like builds itself?
So what I like to call what we do with artificial structure is combining gray and green infrastructure. So that means taking kind of an artificial human-made solution and combining it with a biological restoration solution. So we will outplant corals on our artificial structures that those corals then will continue to grow and create a thriving reef on that system. And so I guess I'll give a little intro to the Ocean Rescue Alliance is a marine conservation and restoration nonprofit, and we primarily utilize artificial structure for different biological purposes. In Florida specifically, we focus more on coral restoration, but we also do oysters and mangroves as well. And just as we were mentioning with this base, we do natural reef restoration in addition to outplanting on artificial reefs. And this really gives us a scalable solution to create reefs in new areas One of the problems is typically everything we do as humans is reactive, and we need to be proactive and preventative. We can't wait for our reefs to die to wonder where our fish are going to go. Not only our food, but a lot of marine ecosystems and fisheries rely on natural reef systems or spend some point of their life on a natural reef. And so if we are losing this critical habitat, we're also risking thousands of species of fish collapsing. And so one of our goals with our organization is to create artificial structure to more closely mimic natural reefs. And that means we're creating microhabitat to support different stages and life stages of fish and different species. Typically, have you heard of artificial reefs before?
Sort of. And then I don't know.
So normally
it sounds kind of straightforward.
They think of ships, right?
Yeah.
But normally it's typically trash of land, construction pilings, debris, ships, and it's been like that for generations, where we'll typically dump land waste and just put it in the ocean and call it fish habitat.
Yeah.
So we're really one of the first companies actually making reefs to mimic natural reef geology. And that's really for the benefit of creating fisheries habitat. And then adding on a biological restoration enables us to create reefs in new areas that might not be as impacted from disease, might be in more favorable growing conditions, at least allows us to make more nurseries. And at the very fundamental, creating habitat for fish. So our goal and our saying is also, saving our oceans one reef at a time. We can never get out enough structure. And just like natural reefs do with creating a barrier to protect the coastline, we can move that all the way up through New York and all over the world. Our desire is especially to focus on island and Caribbean countries that are really getting decimated from storms and are in need of a lot of this structure to protect their coastline and their communities as well.
So you can, so there's many jobs that a reef will do in nature, but it sounds like the two biggest ones is like fisheries and creating fish communities, and then like wave protection.
From coral reefs, you're saying? There, you cut out. Yeah, absolutely. So coral reefs are like the rainforests of the ocean. They're one of the most biodiverse ecosystems in the world, and they provide a habitat for a variety of fish species that we rely on for food, but also the ocean's food system as well. So they also have all these other factors like being coastal protection, protecting against coastal erosion. They're that first barrier of protection that we have from wave energy, especially here in Florida.
Wow. What's the biggest stressor of the reefs in the Maldives?
So the Maldives, I would say they're not under as much pressure as some of the really heavily tourist destinations like Florida and Australia. Although I'd say the Maldives still have, pollution elements, ocean acidification, and temperature threats as well. Probably most likely temperature and ocean acidification would be the most pressing stressors on those reef systems. But here in Florida, we have a variety. But I'd say as a blanket, there's typically all of those factors come into play, and we would do different assessments to see what is impacting reef integrity.
I feel like I hear most about Australian coral reefs is that they have like the biggest coral reef in the world, right? What's the status on that reef? How's it doing health-wise?
So it is recovering, although a lot of the coral reef has unfortunately died. We do have a recovery period. A lot of corals will bleach, which is essentially where the microalgae, which is a symbiotic relationship with the coral, will leave, and the corals will turn white instead of having their different natural and colorful pigments. And from that, they actually have a period where the algae can come back. But the reason for the algae leaving can be a variety of different things. If they're stressed from temperature, if the ocean may be too acidic, there may be pollution, there may be a disease. So each factor is a little different, and you can actually see different traces of what might be impacting a coral, even genetically. So there's a lot of focus, especially in Australia, a lot of groups, organizations, and universities that are immediately addressing these issues. I think there's a lot of hope, but again, there's still a big need, not only for awareness in the public, but to create more action, and it still needs more help.
What was the biggest cause of the Australian coral reef suffering?
I would say definitely temperature and ocean acidification. They don't have as prolific as a disease outbreak as we do in Florida. And Florida is our third largest reef system in the world, which not everybody knows. So we have a natural gem. There's actually a push to create Florida's coral reef as a national park, just like we would have Yosemite and things like that as a nature's wonder. We have that right in our backyard, and a lot of people don't even know how big that reef system is.
So when you say Florida, well, what's the second biggest coral reef in the world?
The Mesoamerican. So that's throughout like the Caribbean and Mexico.
Okay. And then Florida's third. So where exactly in Florida? The Gulf or like on the Atlantic?
It's South Florida from the Atlantic side. So all the way from the Keys, wrapping up through West Palm Beach area. That's the northern part of the reef tract. So it goes on very extensively, and they go through different patch reefs. But a lot of people also only assume coral reefs are in those shallower depths, but we also have deeper sea coral reefs as well as patch reefs. We have coral reefs on the west coast of Florida as well, throughout the Gulf, but they're not like the traditional really stony coral building corals from South Florida.
Wow. I'm afraid to ask this question now, but what's your favorite animal?
Favorite animal?
Imagine everybody thinks marine biologists are dolphins and sharks.
That is hard. It is hard. I'd say an octopus. Although I have a lot of favorite marine organisms, I'd probably say an octopus.
Why is that?
They're one of the most intelligent marine organisms, and I think they also have a little fun fact, I guess, about them. They have 3 hearts, and biomedically, they also can morph and change their pigment. I'm sure you've maybe seen they can camouflage and match different surfaces and even textures, which is really, really insane. So just the amount of advanced like bioinformatics work and things that come from them are really intriguing, I think. They're almost like alien like in the ocean.
How are they able to like sense their environment and then change into that environment? Like how does that happen?
So I'm not a octopus I guess scientist, but they have different essentially sensory organs that can be like photo optic, that they can actually match colors and pigments. Really? But they're able to change so quickly, which I think is just it's insane. And the fact that they're just really advanced and very intelligent, where they can learn even like patterns and tricks and different things and underwater. And I've never had one. I have an aquarium actually in my home, but I've heard that you can't really even have them in tanks. You have to give them mental stimulus, otherwise they get depressed. So they're really, really awesome creatures.
So who's more intelligent, dolphins or octopus?
I don't know. I think it's a measure of depending on what kind of test you've been putting them through. So dolphins are mammals, though, so that is a little bit of a different comparison in terms of just like hierarchy of organismal levels. But dolphins are also very intelligent, which I know people have studied dolphins very extensively. Especially because they create different behavioral and connections with their pods. So they're like more family oriented, and they'll work together. I don't know if I recall ever reading that octopus work together. They're also really interesting. They have a really high intensive maternal contribution. So unfortunately, another fun fact, octopus only reproduce once, and then they die. Yeah. So they have a very high energetic input to reproducing, and they unfortunately pass after doing so, but they can live for years. So
they, how quickly do they die after giving birth?
Within days, typically.
Wow.
Yeah. And ocean marine and marine organisms can be a little brutal. Yeah, typically actually the young will feed on their mother, which is pretty barbaric. Not to now we're down a whole rabbit hole of
Wow.
marine fish and things can be pretty brutal. I mean, even people don't know. I like to sometimes, it's a fun fact for clownfish, actually all start out as male and they compete to be the female. And typically what should have happened in Finding Nemo is Marlin, the male, should have turned into the mom after that happened. So it's really, it's an interesting world in the ocean. I mean, even from having your own tanks at home to pair clownfish, they're very selective in their mate. And typically if you have two smaller ones, they'll fight to become the female. And then the female becomes the larger dominant fish.
Wow. Wow. That is interesting.
So in case you ever want to start an aquarium, make sure you're looking into what fish species you put in there, because they'll start killing each other if you don't know what you're doing.
What kind of fish do you have in your aquarium?
I have a reef tank and a fish only tank. So I have a lot of different tropical fish. I can show you if you'd like. But the typical, like, I have a dory is what I call it for people who don't know what it is, but a hippo tang, lots of tangs and colorful fish from the Indo-Pacific, as well as like Hawaii and things like that.
Yeah, could we see it real quick?
Yeah, you want to see it? 1 second, let's see. So here you are. Here's one of them.
Oh, wow, cool.
This is the reef tank. So I have a lot of different corals. These aren't restoration corals. These are hobby corals, but people kind of use similar techniques. You can break off a fragment of it and grow it. And oftentimes when you break corals into small pieces, they grow more rapidly. Kind of like when we get a cut on our arm.
Wow.
Your skin regenerates quick.
How many fish do you have in that tank?
So this tank, I probably have at least 30.
Wow.
Lots of different tangs. So these are all tangs right here. That's a Sohal yellow tang, powder blue tang, a hippo tang, which is the one that is Dory in Finding Nemo.
Oh yeah. If you're listening to this, it's very bright blue. It's very nice.
Colorful, very vibrant.
How big is that tank?
This tank is 220 gallons.
Wow.
So it's a decent size. I have a larger fish only tank, which I have a Pacific horn shark. You can see her right there.
Wow. Now it's purple. Everything is purple. Is that intentional or?
So that's just a blue light. It goes. I have a different light phase on both the tanks. This one's more. It has bluer lights just to not grow as much algae. Because this isn't a reef tank, but I have some anemones in here. So it's just harder to see with a camera unless I put a red filter lens, and then you can see it better. But yeah.
Wow. Thanks for showing us that.
Yeah, no problem.
So having spent a lot of time in or by water, how has that influenced your outlook on life?
How has it influenced my outlook on life? I'd say very optimistic. I don't know if you've heard of the book called The Blue Mind by Nicholas Wallace. He talks about how having some type of water body in your life brings a lot more peace and tranquility. And I definitely agree with that. I lived away from the ocean in undergrad in Gainesville at the University of Florida for a little bit. And I can say when I'm by the water, it definitely, makes me feel more happier and at peace.
Any water, or it could be a river or a lake, or
his book talks about any water, and just having like a peace from being by water bodies, and just even having a sense of swimming for people who've never swam before. Going in a water body can have a different experience for each person. I personally love diving. very meditative if you haven't dove before, super peaceful. And I'm always very inspired when I dive in the ocean and just admiring all the subtle intricacies on a reef is really enjoyable. I'm not much of I don't enjoy freshwater diving as much, but I've done a lot of it. And in Florida,
Why
we
is
have
that?
a lot of spring. There's just not as much life.
Not as interesting.
It's not as interesting to me, but I mean, it's still unique. In Florida, we have a lot of spring systems and underwater caves. So I've done cave diving, but a lot of it's just dark and cold and no fish. So,
Wow.
but in Mexico, they actually have a lot of cenotes that have a lot of ties back culturally to Mayans that, they believe that was part of, they do like sacrifices and rituals. And a lot of them are very diverse. They have a bunch of different geologic kind of history. So I think it's always interesting to dive. I always encourage people to try it at least once in their life.
I can probably confirm that. I live like a 5-minute walk through the park to Lake Michigan, and I can just stand by the water and it's just like endless, and it's just watch the waves. People are there just sitting, just being there. It has, I don't know, there's something in it for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
My other question for you, I forget. Okay. So I have like I would say like two fears: heights and like when I'm in the water, like the breath and stuff. So I'm kind of afraid to say scuba dive or underwater explore. What is that like doing it so that I can overcome that fear?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you at least didn't say sharks.
No, I watch enough nature stuff to understand that like sharks aren't what people think. What like
Absolutely.
culture thinks of sharks.
Right. Yeah, they're not what their stigma is. Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely recommend you to try it. I think that's always it's a mental block for people, as it sometimes can feel weird breathing underwater.
I'm
And
afraid
oddly
the
enough,
tank's gonna run out while I'm down there.
you can check it though. So it's
Okay.
just being right. You drive your car, when it's going to be empty, you look at your gauges. It's just being, on top of checking your things and being a trained diver. It's very safe, especially for open water diving. It's typically to 60 feet, which is normally you can take safe ascents even from that depth if you're trained. So you should never be really running low. But just checking it, just like you would check your gas tank when you're driving. And always diving with a buddy is the number one rule for scuba diving as well. So you're checking each other. But yeah, I've never ran out of air or had any issues. I used to teach it at UF and really enjoyed working with people who typically had a phobia of diving. But we had at least the luxury for teaching it at the university. They had the whole semester to dive. Okay. So they get a lot of experience doing pool diving and springs that they're very comfortable by the end of it, where some people who do like a weekend course might not be as confident and comfortable. So maybe if you feel like you have a little bit of a fear of it, try to do like a little longer class and just get more practice, even if it's in a pool. And then come try diving in the ocean.
So how deep have you gone?
So I've gone to about 150 feet.
Nice. Yeah. Where was that? Where's the like
so I've done some deeper wrecks off of Florida. And I want to eventually get my tech diving. So when you start getting into depths beyond 60 feet, they have different air mixes that allows you to stay deeper for longer. Basically just pressure increases as you dive down. So to be aware of different gases that accumulate in your blood. But all of that's a safety thing. I don't want to steer you away from diving. Yeah. But so when you do dive at depth, you have to be trained and on the right air for that. But it's definitely really, really fun. One thing I haven't done that I'd like to do is eventually try going in a submarine or things like that would be interesting and fun.
Yeah. You mentioned it before. You've mentioned it throughout the episode, but uh, can you share why you created the Ocean Rescue Alliance?
Yeah. So as a scientist, I've been in the space for a long time, finishing my PhD, and have worked on a lot of different grant restoration projects. And typically, sometimes those can be funded from, different companies that might have made an impact. For example, my master's actually was doing oyster restoration that came off of funding from the BP oil spill. And I've found to be a little bit irritated with internal politics that can come with different constraints within grant funding. Also, we have a very limited amount of grant resources for restoration in the States as a whole. And then even working from a restoration space with corals, we'd think, especially with being a third largest reef in the world, that we'd have hundreds of groups in Florida working on saving our coral reefs and doing conservation work. We have about 7. And those often, up until recently, they can be really competitive for the funding because it's so limited. So they sometimes become, there's a lot of politics that can get involved. And so that is really what inspired me to start my own company, is to find innovative ways to create business models that would sustain the work without relying on grant structures. Although we still can apply for grants, and that's a little bit more of my background. So we have gotten grants before, but we're trying to switch to utilizing art or utilizing doing coastal restoration and mitigation as ways to fund doing work at a higher scale, where we can also create a corporate responsibility, like perhaps doing a guitar-shaped reef for the Hard Rock is one of our ideas that can create, a dive site for that hotel that tailors to the brand, but actually gets a restoration site completed and in a unique way. So creating that responsibility for coastal hotels and developers is really needed, because in Florida, typically all the taxpayers contribute to some of the beach renourishment work, not the direct hotels. So it's a way to really offset and do these larger projects more quickly. And so that's really what pushed me to start my own company, is just being able to non-biasedly work with other organizations, being able to scale up restoration more rapidly, and finding solutions to do it more effectively.
Yeah, that's so, like, art installations in the ocean that serve a purpose. Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
So one of our biggest eco art projects in Florida is called the 1,000 Mermaids Artificial Reef. That's in West Palm, where we sculpt people as mermaids to bring awareness to marine conservation. Right now, we're at about 35 mermaids, but our goal is to get to 1,000 over time. And that's just one example. The Mexico Mayan themed reef is another one, where one of the things we want to do is inspire that community to do an art narrative that's really relevant to that area. You can connect community and culture through art, and even open it up to the community to decide on what kind of site they want. I'd ideally like to see Florida transform into where we have a different dive site for every county and city that can really connect the community together, but also help restore our ecosystems.
That's fantastic. So I saw you were at Miami Crypto Week. Mm-hmm. Can you share what that experience was like, and what technologies excite you most for the future of marine biology?
Yeah, so the crypto space is definitely really like growing and a hot topic right now, right? And the experience was awesome because I'm not as much of a tech person, but do see the ability to combine tech and using technology to advance science and also communicate to the public more effectively. So one thing we're doing within crypto is a lot of different NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which are just essentially different digital art that can connect to restoration projects. So we've been doing NFTs with different things like with Miami Crypto Week, as well as doing Bit Puzzle and Art Basel, and creating these digital experiences that one can connect the people back to the ocean. We're doing virtual and augmented reality where you can dive from your computer, or if you have an Oculus, have an immersive experience. We know not everyone can dive, and it often can be expensive. So we're trying to make it more accessible to learn about the ocean, experience what restoration is, and then really try to connect people back that way.
Wow. So you could theoretically design a reef and you could have people explore it virtually through augmented or virtual reality, and it will help them better understand the ocean and the reef system and how interconnected we are with our oceans. So that technology is that's like a potential thing that could happen, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
And that's exactly what we're wanting to work on, and even using it as a training tool where we can, connect with schools and teach different things like fluid dynamics and things like that, even from a physics perspective, but using the ocean as a way to experience it. And that's one thing that excites me the most about technology now is we're advancing so rapidly in the last 10, 15 years and moving forward, where we can do a lot more things that can benefit our marine environments. And then in terms of NFTs, it's a way to really creatively fund doing restoration and then tying in that trackability. So we'll do a unique art piece that ties into doing coral restoration in Key Largo, Florida. And then we'll make a different one for West Palm Beach or for every project that we do. And it's a way to help fund doing that work and enabling people to have part of that experience as well.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing all of this. Yeah. Switching gears, transitioning now to the tail end of our conversation. I like to ask these particular questions to people just to see how they're similar and different. What are 3 musical artists in your heavy rotation right now?
Heavy rotation right now. I'd say I've been really heavily into Rufus to Soul lately, as well as Khalid and Elderbrook.
What kind of music is Elderbrook?
That's a hard, I don't know how to describe that. I guess it'd be like progressive house music in a sense, but it still has words. So it's kind of a combination. I also like Nora and Pure. And she combines a lot of like instrumental sounds as well as with nature, but it's also kind of house and EDM-esque.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. What's something you're curious about recently?
Something that I'm curious about recently. I mean, I was talking on the energy space. I'm curious on, aside from, moving on from ocean sides of things, one thing that also really intrigues me is how can we also help connect people more in the public and doing more sustainable things. So I think I'm interested in really taking interdisciplinary approaches to solve our immediate problems, that things like, food scarcity, housing issues. I think honestly, with all the issues we have in the world right now, we have a lot of the tools to address these problems immediately. I think it just takes more effective collaboration and cross interdisciplinary approaches where you're combining, engineers with scientists, with the community, and meeting those goals. So I'd say I'm more curious on sustainability as a whole, and implementing that into, more structured approaches for things that we do.
Awesome. Now, when you say interdisciplinary, that means like people of all different kind of skill sets and disciplines, yes, industries type of things.
Yeah, definitely. Basically from different disciplines. I think, we're the most creative that way. Sometimes I feel like, especially in the science space, people tend to stay within their collectives, and we can have someone who knows nothing about science, suggest a solution that actually works. And, I think we need to do that more. That's one reason why we also bring in artists and people from different perspectives into our organization, because there's way more ways to reach people than, what we typically can do as scientists.
Yeah. What's the best airport you've experienced?
The what? Sorry, you cut.
What's the best airport you've experienced?
Airport. Wow. I I definitely say an international one. I got the chance to go to South Korea and
Mhm.
Thailand. So I think the one in Seoul was probably the most interesting one I went to, and primarily being because they had these little robots going all over the place and like directing you to, like, there's no people, it's just robots. So
Really?
yeah. Yeah, in terms of like a stewardess, or if you had to ask a question and it had all the languages. So they had a lot more like technically advanced experiences than I've seen in the States. Yeah.
Wow.
What about
Interesting.
you? I'll reverse that.
Oh, I would say, hmm, I'm not as traveled, I feel like, as other people. Um, let's see. I mean, I like O'Hare
Yeah.
I went to, so I recently went to New York, and uh LaGuardia is completely different than what I've experienced before. So I was visiting my friend in Brooklyn, and I was like, "Oh, I went to the new Apple store." He's like, "Oh yeah, here in Brooklyn." I'm like, "No, LaGuardia." That place is like, it's like a Apple store, and everything is so nice and clean and like design and minimal. It's quite beautiful. I was really impressed with LaGuardia. Um, and I think airports leave an impression on people that travel through. Um, I'm trying to also be more aware of the airports I travel through. So when I went to Spain, it wasn't, I just like wasn't as aware of everything. I went through Madrid. Hong Kong was pretty major. That airport was pretty impressive, I feel like. Um, yeah, I feel like LaGuardia is like right now the most impressive that I've seen. I would not have said that a month ago or like 2 months ago. When did I go? But like what they're doing is was pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I know, I guess in the States, have you ever been to Denver?
I have. I've
They have
flown
that
from there once.
whole um conspiracy thing with they even embrace it in the airport. If you
I'm
haven't
not,
looked it up, look it up.
so it's like it's haunted, or there was another, it's
Something
they're
like that,
old.
that they have like chambers underneath it and it's a weird alignment. It's just interesting. It's like with the whole New World Order stuff, and they actually have art that you can see in the airport that is of it. There's actually a documentary on it. So go ahead and watch it. And then next time I go snowboarding in Colorado often. So every time I go, I'm like, that's funny. They're just embracing the
Yeah,
stigma.
it's good marketing.
It is. It is. But
uh
I'll be aware of LaGuardia next time I go.
it's probably, you have to go through the, no, I think it's the main terminal that they've completed. It was a
Yeah.
disaster and a dump before this. It was like terrible. But what's something that excites you for the next 2 years?
For the next 2 years, I'd say definitely, moving forward with my company. It's been a really rewarding process, and I hope to grow my team and hopefully be able to hire more people soon, but also expand into new avenues, like ocean energy, and even maybe back to marine medicine eventually, as we keep growing. So definitely excited to continue to grow.
Yeah, it's that is exciting. Well, thank you for taking the time to meet with us today and share more about the ocean and the work that you're doing. It's pretty cool.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been fun.